Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. Before I get started, I want to note that we have closed captioning available. If you look toward the bottom of your screen, you will see the CC button. You can press that button and the closed caption should appear at the bottom of your screen. I'll give you a moment to do so. And thank you, of course, to AI Media and our closed captioners, excuse me. Hello again. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Lisa Coleman. I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation here at NYU. I use she and her pronouns. Again, thank you for joining us for this terrific conversation as part of our NYU BeTogether Global Scholars and Innovators series. And this conversation is with Maryangel this conversation today, and we're very excited about to feature Maryangel García-Ramos Guadiana, and we are just thrilled to have her with us today. I'm going to provide some opening remarks, and then I will go on to introduce her. Now, let me begin by saying that I hope everyone is taking very good care out there. People keep saying this is a new normal. It is not. There's immense stress, serious illness, health issues, increased home caring for the self and others, colleagues, etc. I've been saying that what we need is a new different that recognizes the disparate impacts and urgencies of now instead of rhetoric. We have to move toward transformation and emphasize equity in action. As an NYU community, both large and small, we must also continue to recognize the global impact during this pandemic on NYU and our partners, impacts which are compounded by the disparities in environmental justice impacts. We encourage everyone to continue to prioritize individual, family, and collective health and well-being during these unprecedented times. We know that each day there are things that we hear about and occur across our country and nation impacting individuals. And so we also just like to acknowledge those impacts far and wide across our global communities. And in that, we would like to acknowledge all of the frontline workers, those healthcare workers and people who are working in the front lines in all kinds of ways, right? To deal with, of course, the pandemic of COVID-19, as well as the other pandemics that we're seeing in terms of racial justice, gender, disability issues, et cetera. So thank you to all of you all working in the front lines. And also thank you to the people working behind the scenes, whose labor is often unseen and undervalued, those who continue to sacrifice for our well-being. And those include those who clean and care for hospitals, maintain facilities, public transportation people, those who delivery workers, those who support and care for us and allow us to care for ourselves. Thank you. We know that we could not be without you. I want to remind all of our NYU community members to continue to visit the NYU Returns and COVID information site, where you can gain additional information about NYU's latest plans and resources, and these available to all of our community members. Now, before we dive into today's program, deeper into today's program, I would like to take a moment to honor those who've come before us. I would like to recognize those who've paved the way for us to be here, including those disability rights advocates named and unnamed. We also firmly repudiate and condemn the ongoing crises of anti-Asian, anti-Black violence in the United States and the disparate impact, of course, we've seen the disparate impact on women and of course, Latinx communities and other marginalized communities. And we stand firmly in solidarity with these communities. We also acknowledge the land upon which we all sit, whether we're gathered here in this virtual space, but we know that many of our institutions and campuses are located on the unceded lands of Indigenous peoples. NYU acknowledges that the university as an institution created in the United States was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, as well as the discounted labor of many. We continue in our efforts to both recognize and dismantle these systems, the legacies of these systems, and the exclusions. Please join me in 5 seconds of silence in recognition of our ancestors, the lives that have been lost and known to us and unknown, the Indigenous land upon which we sit, and of course, to recognize the lives that we've lost over this last year. Thank you very much. This event is part of our NYU BeTogether Initiative, a change-making effort that was announced by President Hamilton and our Board of Trustees. It's part of an initiative focused on making global change across NYU's global network by innovating, acting, and transforming together. This initiative builds on data and metrics and other initiatives in previous years where NYU community members have had the opportunity to voice and reflect on who we are and where we've been. From the foundational data as well as ongoing collection, we build and grow and reimagine where we want to go as a community. And this initiative is part of that. As I mentioned before, COVID-19 and the exacerbated inequities, pervasive racism, inequities in terms of the depression of women in research. We've seen the impact in terms of employment for people with disabilities, and the impact on marginalized and disenfranchised communities has pressed upon us the urgency of all of the work that we must do together. It is up to us to make changes now, to transform what we do and to take action. Here at NYU, that is exactly what we're doing. We're working to foster change and strengthen our community by taking action. At NYU, the disability inclusive culture has been a focus of us, aligned to our 2017 data collection process called Being at NYU. And today's important conversation is an opportunity to support this critical discourse around disability inclusive culture that we will hope that will support the ongoing actions that advance this work, particular to thinking about culture, disability, and of course, our global campuses. While there's certainly been progress, we know there's much work to do. Topics will certainly emerge that we will focus on here at NYU, and recognizing that we are a vibrant community of people with all abilities and strengths. And I hope you will go back to your communities for deeper discussion, learning, research, action around ongoing themes such as ongoing structural, institutional, interpersonal, individual ableism and oppression, evolving the understanding and reframing of the diversity of abilities and strengths. And many of you have heard me talk about the asset model and focusing on the assets that so many of us have versus focusing on the problems. Focusing on intersectionality and the various intersections of race, gender, sexuality, ability, age, etc. Really digging down deep into these understandings of visible and non-apparent disabilities and neurodiversity. And as I just said, challenging a deficit model and moving towards an asset model. And of course, think about how we center marginalized and the legacies of those marginalizations in all the work that we do. And I want to stress again that we have this asset-based approach, understanding that solutions and innovation come from, right, the diversity across across the contributions that we can make. Some of you have heard me say this, but when I look in the mirror, I don't see a problem. And when I look at my team, and when I look at our speakers here today and everyone, I see a solution, and we must take that approach, because today we will be discussing, right, how we can build capacity and broaden our communities. In OGI, through our work, we continue to focus on action and, of course, intersectionality. In order to do this, I just want to give some particular information about the intersectionality when we think about these issues as it pertains to persons with disabilities. We know, according to the National Organization for Disability and their work on race and poverty, that there is indeed a double, triple, sometimes quadruple burden for people of color living with disabilities. African Americans at 21%, 22%, 21% for indigenous communities, and 17.6 Latinx and 14.4 0.5 for Asian communities. So what we know is that people of color often have higher rates for having disabilities. And then when we think about the intersections of gender, LGBTQ plus issues, health and wellness, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but also we continue to think about those intersections here at NYU. One of our initiatives most recently was our NYU Women 100 initiative, where we really focused on these intersections and thinking about the women who were not honored during the 1920 vote and centennial, and we tried to honor them during our centennial celebration. As we move on today, we'll be discussing some of these differential impacts. In this spirit, though, we do want to say that it's important to think in terms of collaboration, and we want to acknowledge our partners in this work and specific colleagues across NYU who've been helping us to think about intersectionality, disability, inclusive culture, and access. First of all, our students, faculty, and staff, advocates, past and present here at NYU, thank you. If anyone's ever heard me speak, you know I really embrace agitation, and we need that as we move forward. Our partners across the university, including the Moses Center for Accessibility, and in particular, Robin Weiss. Thank you, Robin. The Provost Office Disability, Inclusion, and Accessibility Working Group, and including its co-chairs, Professors Faye Ginsberg and Mauro Mills, and of course, Karen Assisi. And thank you so much to the group, and of course, to the leaders of that group. NYU Center for Disability Studies, Professor Christy Patton and Steinhardt, the Office of Equal Opportunity, and in particular, Kelly Collier-Brown for their work around employee accommodation and related training support, the digital accessibility teams, and of course, from my team, I just have to say, such an incredible team. Thank you to Dr. Karen Jackson-Weaver, Chandani Patel, Dr. Chandani Patel, Luis Cesteros, and my entire team who've done an incredible amount of work to produce our digital inclusion faculty toolkit and our disability zones, our Senate representatives, student alumni groups, and others, and of course, a special thank to Tech Day Monterrey for your continued partnership. Make sure you check out our co-sponsored event with Tech Day Monterrey from last December and our recognition of International Day of Persons with Disabilities. You can find that on our YouTube channel. And of course, thank you to Michael John Carley, our consultant who's helped shepherd this program and serves as the part-time disability culture consultant in the office and supports the work of our disability inclusive culture here, Disability Culture Hub here at OGI. Okay, that's enough. I know I've spoken enough about all of the things, and now we get to hear from our honored guest. Maryangel. Maryangel is a Mexican woman for the last 12 years has worked for disability rights, diversity, inclusion, and social development and innovation. Living with a physical disability of her own, she is truly passionate about changing the one single story idea, and we'll talk about that. Disability conversations that happens in Mexico and across the world. What stands out in her approach is the advocacy and her idea of giving people the opportunity to tell their own stories, so that we can learn about the disabilities and the diversity within disabilities, identities, gender, and of course the context. As a consultant, Maryangel accomplishes narrative transformation through different pop culture and media platforms in order to create a trend switch that leads to cultural change. The core of this approach is an intersectional lens that lends positive integrating messages about cultural and physical differences, our bodies, our ages, our gender, and our preferences. Maryangel is the founder of Mexican Women with Disabilities, an organization creating a national network of disabled Mexican women. This organization gathers their stories into a collective political force that that people outside the community can listen to and see and help to transform this work into political advocacy. She is also the leader of the Diversity and Inclusion Office at Tecnológico de Monterrey, creating and leading the D&I strategy for people with disabilities, LGBTQ+, women, cultural diversity, and generational diversity, as well as thinking about socioeconomic diversity. She is a proud member of their Social Development Board and People with Disabilities Citizen Board. She has participated as a representative of Mexican civil society at the United Nations Convention of People with Disabilities, and in 2010, she was awarded the Mujer Tech Award. She is also the author of two TEDx Talks, The Power of My Story and The Revolution of Disability. And she has developed several inclusion and innovation strategies for NGOs, musical festivals, companies, and government public policy initiatives. She's recognized by NPR as one of the 6 fearless women who inspire InStyle also named her as one of the 30 badass women to follow. And I can say she is exactly that, badass. Today, she continues to develop a structural strategy that fights to abolish ableism and fights for gender equality, human rights, and inclusion in our communities. Maryangel, all I can say is you're a rock star. We are really thrilled to have you here with us today. And so let's get started.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Lisa. That was intense. Thank you. I'm very grateful to be in this space, and I've been such a fan of the work NYU's been doing around diversity and inclusion, and we had a really good talk in December, and I'm really happy to keep going on this conversation. So
absolutely, and thank you for your partnership. So I'm just going to jump in here. So in 2001, the World Health Organization published the International Classification of Functioning Disability in Health, in other words, the ICF. And the ICF provides a standard language for thinking about classifying body function, structure, activity, et cetera, around the world. And of course, we know that we've seen some updates to that in the United States, for instance, with the 2008. But this helps us to assess the health, functioning activities, and factors in the environment that help us to think about what does it mean to fully participate. And disability culture here means including people with disabilities in everyday activities and them to have roles as similar to those who do not have disabilities. And of course, this, as we've talked, as I just mentioned, will involve more than just rhetoric, right? We have to think about policies, creating a culture of inclusion, et cetera. So could you describe and talk to us a little bit about the work that you've been doing and to create a disability inclusive culture within the current context of your work in Mexico?
Thank you, Lisa. First of all, I would like to start giving a little bit of context of what is it that's going on with people with disabilities or disabled people here in Mexico. We had our last census in 2020, and this is the first time that we realized that we're around 20 million people with disabilities or limitations, which is kind of like, I think, 16 or 17% of the total population in our country. Before that number, we had a number that we were around 8 million. That's what we thought, okay? So going from 8 million to 20 million, it's huge. And it's something that, the disabled community and especially civil society that we've been working on this has been pushing forward to, identify us. We're here, we're part of the community, but without numbers, we tend to be more invisible. So with that said, we have very little numbers that make us understand what is it that we're living as people with disabilities over here. But the little numbers that we have are terrible, are shocking, are difficult to talk about, to read, to even make presentations about them. If I could share some of them, it would be, for example, 22% of disabled people in Mexico cannot read or write. The average school level that people with disabilities can study is between 6th grade and 7th grade. Not even half of us in Mexico have the opportunity to be economically active, etc. And I think we'll talk about a little bit afterwards about gender and disability, but these are numbers that make us understand that is why we're the most, according to our surveys over here, we're the most discriminated group in Mexico. So it is hard to keep pushing this idea of, disability rights, because disability rights are human rights. And we keep pushing this as advocates or as activists. And I see people around the whole country pushing this idea. And it's really hard because over here in Mexico, most people with disabilities are in poverty or extreme poverty. Most of them don't have access to internet. So when we push and when we talk about, creating public policy that actually works, it's normally seen as like a nice to have or optional to have, our law systems are a little bit different than in the United States. In the ADA, for example, we have a law over here, but the way it's reinforced or it's made happen, it has very little incentive to make it happen. If you don't make it happen, it's nothing. It's not like a lawsuit. It's going to solve it. So it's really hard to push that. What I've seen in our communities over here is that for the past years, and you said it at the beginning, we honor the ones who paved us the way, right? All around the globe. We were talking about Crip Camp in Mexico, like this past weekend, we were talking about everything that we do around disability in the world impacts everyone with disabilities around the world. It doesn't matter where. So we honor people around the globe, and especially in Mexico, who paved the way. But what I've seen recently is that our communities, our collective, we call it that way, has been pushing more and more aggressively and strongly than the years before. I think it's part of how we're evolving and the access that we have to making content, creating content, accessing to it. And I think it's been I've seen it more. I've seen the harder push. And I think the biggest issue around that is parting from changing the narrative that we are like this broken beings that need to be helped, and that our own existence is like this tragedy. And we don't see disability as part of human diversity. We don't see it as functional diversities, neurodiversities. We're just seen as part of, the outsiders that don't work like the rest of the population should work. So it's sometimes an optional thing to do. So the work that we've been doing here is pushing it for it not to be optional and to actually make people understand, and decision makers to understand, that we are a very important political force, that we're a big part of the country, like 20 million people is big. So it has been through that way. And I think it's evolved within the years of how people are waking up to even questioning things around, even like questioning concepts like ableism or, discrimination in general.
Thank you so much, Maryangel. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that again about, I was reading your, I think it was the NPR article, and I was reading and you were talking about, right, changing that narrative, right? And really thinking about how, we're not broken, right? We are what we are. And then how do we engage where we are? And so I really like that. And the idea of that people need help, like that patronage idea, the tragedy, right? So thank you for reinforcing that. And reinforcing that idea of human rights. And so you're the, we're about to jump into a little bit about gender. So you're the founder of a major nonprofit, which I mentioned during the introduction, called Mexican Women with Disabilities. And through that organization, you've led, advocated for legislation, some of the things that you've talked about, but in particular, thinking about that intersection with gender. And in 2017, you represented Mexico at the United Nations Convention, on which I also mentioned. So can you talk to us a little bit about the work with Mexican women with disabilities, and just elaborate on sort of the organization's history and tell us a little bit how you came to create it, right? Tell us the arc of the story, okay?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I've been someone with a physical disability. I use a wheelchair or a scooter to experience the world. And I've had a physical disability for around 22 years of my life. So it's very different, my experience with talking with other friends that have disabilities that actually were born with a disability. It's been very interesting to understand that there is no one single story about disability. We always tend to think like people with disabilities. What are people with disabilities? Everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different context. Even some of us may have certain privileges when it comes to socioeconomic privileges or when it comes to opportunities, race, etc. So I've experienced my disability and I accepted it. And it was a process that at the beginning, I always thought, I questioned it. Why is it that I think that disability is like this dirty, bad word? Why should disability be something wrong that I'm ashamed of not walking? Why is it that I have this idea on my mind? And for so long, sometimes I was the only one of my friends who had a disability. And I kind of felt like sometimes alone, even if my family were supportive and pushing me to be my best. And I had that privilege of having that family. I kind of felt kind of lonely sometimes. And I never thought that someone would really understand what is it that I was going through until I had more friends with disabilities, and especially women with disabilities. Because even issues like having your period, for example, with a disability, having a physical disability, who could I talk to about this? Who could I talk to about this without, being afraid to ask, or talking about this particular issues of my own experiences, myself identifying as a woman. And so it was like a lonely road, but kind of I started to like knit like this networks of my own. And then as an advocate and an activist around disability, we've noticed, not only me, but other activists as well, that there wasn't a focus around gender and disability. So when it came to the gender equality fight, we were not included. So we were like the forgotten sisters, like Stephanie Ortaleva, which she is like the founder of Women Enabled International. She accounted the term like, the forgotten sisters, and we were that. We were not included on these marches. We're not included in accessible. Our spaces are not accessible, not digital or physical on the marches. So we were not part of that. And when it came to disability, women with disabilities didn't have a spotlight or focus. And we talked about it like it would be the same for everyone. And in Mexico, particularly, something that has been going on terribly is like violence against women, especially like sexual and femicide, has been growing for years. And it's a dangerous place to live, especially if you're a woman, and if you're women or girls of women, and especially if you have disabilities. So we needed to shine a spotlight on that, and we needed to create networks so that we didn't feel that lonely. We could share experiences, but as well to find ourselves, to find each other, to share experiences. Somebody once told me when I was giving a talk or something, and somebody said to me like, it's amazing what you're doing for disability, and it's so great that you're the voice of women with disabilities. It's amazing. And I just stopped and I was like, no, I'm not. I can't be, because I only know my experience, but I'm not deaf. So I don't know what the deaf community lives or deaf women live. I'm not blind, so I don't know what they live. And even if I had someone that has a similar disability like mine, I can't be their voice because they have their own voices. We don't need to give their voices. We already have them. What we need is platforms, what we need is networks, what we need is to be seen in this fight, in the gender equality fight, and in the, in the disability rights movement. So that's what we created it. I started with my friends, with my disabled friends. And it was this idea, like, let's create these networks. Let's, push forward. Let's do advocacy around the Senate. Let's just create our own stories. Let's tell our own stories, because most of the stories have been told by us without us. So let's do this. Let's do a platform that makes it that way. And it has been growing throughout the years, and it's been amazing to understand the different perspectives around disability. And I think they're all valid. There could be women with disabilities that are not okay and don't identify their disability as part of, their, I don't know, like their identity. And it's something that they reject and they wish they didn't have it. But at the same time, we have people who are very proud of their disabilities, and it's part of the ableist system that we live in, and capitalism and other isms around it. But it's interesting to validate their voices and their own perspectives from where they're coming from, because again, there's no one single story about disability and about women. And also with women, we tend to forget that women with disabilities are also women around the world. It's just, we don't talk about, it's not talked about. We're not included. If we talk about diversity, we rarely talk about disability. At least, for example, in Mexico and Latin America, we see it a lot. We talk about all the issues, but disability is, oh yeah, it's true, also disabled people. So if we include women with disabilities, then we are going to make sure that we're including everyone, I think. And that's how it started, and we keep on pushing and we keep on growing. But my first goal or objective was, let's create these networks. Let's find ourselves. Let's tell our own stories. Let's just make the world see us. And that's how it started. And we keep pushing. And it's hard sometimes with the issues that we deal with, but I think everyone inside who's been creating these networks also are discovering themselves a lot with discovering other women. So I think that's very amazing.
I think it's amazing what you're talking about, the power of community, right? And coming together, and then power of seeing oneself and collective vision. And that's important because it does break up that single story. So thank you so much for that answer. And thank you for creating the platform. I mean, seriously, just an amazing job there. So as I mentioned in the introduction, you have a rich cross-sector leadership portfolio. You've just done a lot, inclusive strategies, you work at universities. We just talked about you creating your own nonprofit. I mean, you're kind of like I said, a rock star here. So one of the things, and I did not say during the introduction, is you've created strategies for, I kind of hinted at it, but music platforms, and you participated in a comedy tour for Mexican women with disabilities. And I'm super interested in this. Our provost here actually has also taken some stand-up comedy, and I'm actually signing up for some stand-up comedy. So we'll have to connect on that later. But the stand-up sit-down tour. Can you share us what brought you to these spaces? Tell us a little bit about your connection with the arts. And we also know that comedy is very charged. So tell us a little bit about how you engage comedy as that in that terms of that modality for social change.
So yeah, I think it's a very interesting subject. Everything that has to do, maybe it's my millennial in me, but I think that everything that has to do with pop culture, I think is one of the biggest um, ways to transform culture. It says it's popular culture to transform narratives, to change it. So one of the fun parts about the job that we did in Mexican Women with Disabilities, because there are some parts that are not fun at all, but we were thinking like, how is it that we can tell our own stories? And every time I gather with my other disabled friends and we talked about, relationships, going out with someone you met on, apps, or like going out to the street, we always like shared like the kind of the same stories, very ableist stories, obviously, even like, you know, harassment stories that were normalized because we're women with disabilities, and people think that they're allowed to touch our bodies or our hair or our, functional devices, or like, so when we laughed about it, and I was like, we're laughing just so that we don't cry, right? Because this is not okay and we normalize this. So we were like, how can we tell this? How can we tell this in a in a way that it will impact a little bit more? So with another friend, we were talking about it, and she was like, well, let's have the idea and let's push it. Let's make like the sit down comedy. We're not standing up, most of us. Some of us will, but let's just tell our own jokes. We're not professional comedians at all. But I think it's very very, has a lot of value to tell our own stories and laugh about it a little bit. Not laugh about, not mock disability, but actually kind of laugh about people around disability who don't have disabilities, and how we experience the world and how we can educate with a little bit of laughs. Comedy can be a place where the stories are told about us without us. And it opens the gate for people to have the permission, because it's a joke, to make a joke about us. And sometimes we said it, I don't think content is innocent, because I don't ever think a joke is a joke. Sometimes you can laugh about something, you're like, I shouldn't be laughing about this. But I think that it opens the gate to discrimination. And sometimes we don't see it. And if you're not part of that group that has been discriminated, that, as I said in the beginning, in Mexico, people with disabilities are mostly in poverty, and mostly like the system has failed, or the system has worked, or in order to have them there. And just to mock people, just how they talk, how they walk, how they experience the world, what does it make? Like, what does it give you after that? So what we wanted to do is own that narrative by ourselves. Like, let's tell the story from our side, and let's laugh about it, and let's laugh about you now a little bit, right? And so it's a way to, transforming the narrative around it, owning it in the first place. What we did with concerts was the same thing. I love music, and I love music festivals, and I miss them so much. COVID, but
Yes.
one of the best the biggest festivals I've been to was in Austin, Texas, at ACL. And the very first time I saw a music festival that big, that had, a long time ago, that had sign language interpreters, ASL in English, right? And I was in shock. And I remember my very first experience that I was there, and I saw Sam Smith, I remember, and it was before he won any Grammys or he was super famous. And I was there with, he was singing, and then the sign language interpreter was singing, and then deaf people around me were singing. And then I had a blind person next to me. And then I had, like, everybody was there and everybody was feeling the same thing. So I think, again, the arts, they change everything, and everybody was feeling the same thing at the same time. They had the access, or everything was set for them to feel the same. And I started crying, obviously. And I was like, we have to take this to Mexico. In Mexico, this doesn't happen. So we brought it to one of the biggest festivals over here in north of Mexico. And it was a success. But obviously, it was a very different business model than it was in the US, because in the US, it was a company that actually did it and they paid them for it. Over here, we were just a bunch of volunteers and sign language interpreters that have never done it in their lives, and they were trying to understand how to do it. And we called people in the US, show us how to do it. We just want to pilot this. And it was amazing. And it's something that we keep pushing to the bigger festivals. And COVID came. But I think that we have got to focus on, not only push public policy, laws, system, the system, how it works, but we also have to keep pushing around the arts and pop culture, because I think that is the most immediate way to change it. Over here in Mexico, we have the telenovelas, which are
I want to say, it's not just because you're a millennial or whatever you are. If you do like I say all the time, you go back to the 60s, what did they use? Social media. It wasn't Facebook and all of that, right? But it was social media. And so that's how we think about changing the narratives, changing culture. And you're exactly right. Policies, activism, etc. But the arts, right, have such an influence. And you saying even you miss the festivals, right? So many of us miss the arts, right?
Yes.
Right. So
they change everything, and they change people's lives. And as I said, telenovelas over here are like they're very charged with information. I'm like, we have to change that too. So it's like kind of pushing all these content to actually make us more than the sidekick or like like pushing it to actually make us, the protagonist of the stories, which is
to own the story. And I love that when you said that, right? To take it back and own the stories yourselves. I want to say we're going to open it up to questions very soon here. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to open it up. And I, of course, have a final question, but I know we got some questions. So please drop your questions in. So my next question is really, we're a university. So of course I should ask my university question. And you work at a university. We talked a little bit about this, but for people who weren't able to attend the session that we had in December, can you talk us a little bit just about your position within the university structure, what some of the major priorities that you all are working around in terms of thinking about these intersections, including disability, right, and the work that you're doing around a lot of different things in your work, and how you think about, right, the university partnerships with some of the other things that you've talked about, the external work. I know you've done work with SW, South by Southwest. You're sort of, so tell us a little bit about that too.
I think over here, the role of universities is very important in society. I think, obviously it's a hub of, creating information and creating standards, even like investigation. But I also think it's a place where people can be, or it should be that way. People should be who they want to be and create. It's a space for creation. And so over here, what we've done is like, we do a lot around everything has to do with structure in our systems. Like we have to change our processes to make them more inclusive, etc. But I think one of the things that I'm most proud of that we've been doing is, what are we doing with community? How are we listening to people raise their voices? We did our diversity inclusion committees, which we're very happy that they're now official. And so we're listening to people's voices. And I think that is the most important thing about creating networks. The same that we did with Mexican women with disabilities. I think it's the same thing. It's just about people being able to have platforms. I've always said that I'm not the average person with disability in Mexico. And I have privilege just being able to speak English as a second language, and being able, probably it wouldn't be as easy for me to be here talking with you, or having, this position at Tech, or leading, etc. I am not. So it's very important to understand that not everybody has a platform. So what we wanted to do at Tech is create platforms for people to actually, raise their concerns, their voices, contribute, etc. And also make everything education accessible, because I think through education, we can change the world. We can transform communities. We can, knowledge gives us power. And sometimes community power is scary for people who make decisions, right? So that's what we're pushing forward. And I think it's been a very interesting road, but also within our partners outside, or the people not only within the community and the university, but with other universities like NYU or other organizations, even civil society organizations that just they raise their hands. And also Tech is a very privileged space because it's a private university, probably one of the most influential private universities in Latin America, if not the most. So people always look at Tech to see like, what are you doing? So it's a big responsibility. Like, what is it people are doing? Why are you questioning? People question us a lot about every issue, which I love that. I love that. It's not like bad. I think it's amazing because it forces decision makers to pave roads.
To engage, exactly.
Exactly. So I think it's been interesting in that way, but the most important part around our diversity and inclusion strategy, I think for the past years has been around community. And I think it should continue that way. And we should give every time a little bit more power or more platforms to people to actually create with everyone, not only the person who leads the diversity and inclusion office or people who are creating the diversity and inclusion strategy for 2025, which is what we're doing, right now, but it's about engaging them for actually the things that we're creating actually working for the community that we wanted to create for. So yeah.
Right. Actually engaging the community in the co-creation process, which is so important. And I love this, the platforms, what you're talking about is sort of, I say this a lot, right? It's the platform that allows you to get the voices out there and those unique voices. So, all right, I'm going to turn to some questions. They've popped in. And so the first question is from Lizette Torres Gerald, I think, and if I've mispronounced your name, I apologize. How do we remove the stigma around disability with our Latinx communities when many Latinx people do not know about the disability rights movement, and that ableism, Christianity, and patriarchy can be so strong in our communities?
It's a strong question. It's hard, but I think the most important part would be, or the thing that I think works the most, is making our stories be heard, pushing people with disabilities to tell their own stories, because we have all the systems that make us believe something about ourselves. Like, it's not only one, but there are a lot. And especially communities that have been historically discriminated. Everything has to do with Black communities, Latinx communities, etc., especially in the United States, for example, right? Or indigenous groups here in Mexico, colonialism. There's a lot of isms that just like make us stay in a particular place, and that's how it's supposed to work. So I would say, like, tell our stories in every single platform that we have. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to be Beyonce to feel like our story is important, or have a TED Talk, like had the opportunity to have. Our platforms could be with our families, our platforms could be with our friends, even like social media, if we have the access to it. I think that is the most the fastest way to engage around, okay, sometimes what I can see, I can be, and not literally, but if I see someone with disability that's actually questioning it, and I have a disability, it will be like, oh, I'm allowed to question this. So I think it's important to tell our stories and to keep pushing, and especially, representation of Latinx communities, whether they have disabilities, or even if, between Latinx communities, if everything that has to do around with race, everything that has to do even with the LGBT communities having a disability as well, and being like all this intersectional in groups, and also understanding again that there's no one single story of disability. So I think it's very important so that we can share more stories, that we can be more present, so that we can actually make changes for people around who are living in these very oppressed situations.
I have to say thank you for that. And as we're part of educational institutions. And so that arc of education, which is not just the education in the classroom. So like what you said about in our families, the various platforms that we can employ, and there's so much that we can do in terms of breaking down some of those ideas and those intersections that you talked about as well.
Mhm.
So thank you. So the next question is, how do we, and this is from Lizette again, how do we make sure to connect, how do you make sure in the work that you do, and you've talked about this, thinking about particularly socioeconomic class or things like literacy that you talked about, right? Because so often we use the same strategies and they don't work for all, as you've talked about, all constituents. So talk to us a little bit about the work across socioeconomic class.
So I can put like two examples. What we do in Mexican women with disabilities, we were having trouble, and we still do, like engaging with other women with disabilities who don't have access to internet right now, because that's the way we've been creating our networks for the past year and a half or 2 years. But the people that are living, women that are living most violence, women with disabilities who are living most violence, or who have less opportunities, are on the rural communities or even like in poverty or extreme poverty. So how do we find them if we don't go there? So what we've been doing is trying to collaborate directly with organizations that don't necessarily work with disability in the first place. So trying to make them help us find these women and see what we can do. So it's important to go outside other organizations that work with different groups, especially everything that has to do around socioeconomic. So I think it has kind of been, we're starting working on that, but I think it's the best way to do it because it's people who have been there for years in these communities working. So we have to figure out how we can get in and help them and help make them help us as well. And at Tech, it's a big responsibility, especially in education, the access to education, particularly when it comes to quality education. In Mexico, we have a very big issue around education and the quality of it and the access to it in every way, not only for people with disabilities, but for a lot of people. So Tech has a lot of responsibility, a lot, because being a private university, so it's been one of our pillars in diversity and inclusion, not only, just giving scholarships, but understanding like, okay, the scholarships that we give to people who are like in very challenging socioeconomic situations that would never ever be able to pay, school at Tech, how we get to know them more. The other day we were questioning, we have a really big program over here called Leaders of Tomorrow, and it's huge. It's one of the biggest ones. And we don't know yet, and it's something that we're pushing forward, like, okay, do these people, these students belong to historically discriminated groups? And if they do, then we have to make a different approach again, because there's no one single story. But it's something that we've learned on the way, and we have to question that, and we have to work again with communities, with the communities they come from, trying to understand what is it that, their cultural background, and then understanding what is it that we can do besides just giving a scholarship, right? Because they come over here and they're like in the same classroom with, students who their parents are very, very wealthy, and they have very different, approaches to life, maybe, and privileges. So it's very interesting to see those dynamics and actually question ourselves with that. So I think it's one of the most challenging ones to do and to understand.
Thank you so much. And thank you for talking about broadening the networks and the actual practice about doing that. So I'm going to try to squeeze 2 questions in. We're going to see, we got about 7 minutes left, and I'm not going to be able to get to everyone's questions. I apologize, but the next question is about, and it's from Professor Sally Cohen. And it's a question about really about ADHD, neurodiversity, right? Sort of thinking about this area, this emerging area of around disabilities, and particularly in the research. So could you talk to us, talk to us a little bit about some of the work you've been doing around this area, and particularly maybe even some of the work you're doing at the university with faculty and others in terms of particularly thinking about neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, etc.
So yeah, what we've been doing is like, again, understanding that there is no single story about disability, and we have to understand like the different needs that, our functional diversities or neurodiversities come into place, when we are in the community, like in the university space, whether it's digital or whether it's like physical spaces. What we've been doing is we've been working on a pilot around how we have got to change our model, our education model, and our processes for people with ADHD and autism and neurodiversities, because in the end, we all learn differently. And because we're part of the enabler system in general, we create a model that we think will work for everyone, but not necessarily. So that's been one of the pilots that we've been pushing forward, and we're working on a guide to see what is it that the process that we need to change in the classroom, and also like with services, also with community, also with parents, also with decision makers. So and what we've done with this, we worked it with the community. We sit down with faculty, we sit down with people who were part of the communities, and they would raise their voices and like, what are the biggest issues that you're dealing with? Already a tech. And I think it's something that we'll keep pushing forward, and we'll do the same with every kind of like disability on the way to change our processes.
To identify the gap areas and where you can.
Yes, and also like understanding that there is, when it comes to disabilities, invisible disabilities are always overseen, like overlooked. We don't do much. If we see them, it's like, oh yeah, we need to focus and do this. But sometimes we don't see them, and we just think they're just different, but we don't know. And people start speculating, and it could be discriminated. So I think we have got to also focus more on raising, shining the light where there are disabilities that sometimes we don't see, or we don't fully understand yet. And we need to listen to people who are part of that community to help us understand.
Thank you so much. And thank you for talking about the pilots that you're running in terms of bringing the faculty and the co-creation and learning through those processes. I cannot believe it. We have literally 4 minutes left. So I'm sorry. I know there are additional questions out there. Please, we are so thrilled to have Maryangel with us, but I'm going to end with one question. And it's the question that we like to end with, which is really, tell us a little bit about what brings you joy in this work, right? How you sustain yourself in this work. What does that look like? Because as you said before, right, we know that sometimes we see the underbelly. You see some of the work that's not so, some of the things that aren't so positive. So how do you sustain yourself in the work, and how do you work with others to sustain, right, and to think about the positive ways and the innovations that we can do together?
Well, what a question. So yeah, in this work, and when we work around, people's lives, people's rights, people's access to opportunities, it can sound like a noble work, something nice to do, very noble, but sometimes I have been, there's some times that I don't even want to get out of bed and say like, is this worth it? Is this really worth it? Because it's so tiring, like going against the system in the end. And I think for me, what brings me joy is the fact that I can give a little back. I'm very aware of the privilege that I have. If I have a master's degree to this day, and I have a disability, and I'm a woman, and it's understanding that, and how can I use that? Obviously, I don't refer to privilege not particularly in race or socioeconomic, but the opportunities that I've been given because of the system, because of my context. So to me, it's just like, how can I use that because I chose that. I chose this as my career, as my path. Tomorrow I could say, I don't want to do this. I want to go save whales, which I would love to do as well. But it's about not giving back, but giving yourself to the world and using that privilege or those opportunities that you have. Because I think that what I've seen is when we see people, the first time you see, or it has happened to me, people realize the power of their voices or the power of the stories, and they realize, and you're seeing it the moment they're realizing it. To me, it's just like, that's a seed. That's a seed that it will eventually will be an army, and we will change it. But we need to keep on planting seeds. And if tomorrow I sleep on the shower and die, or you never know, it's just like knowing that this that I'm doing is bringing me joy. And if sometimes what I've learned in this process, people who are activists or advocates, if there is some moment that you need to stop, you need to stop, because sometimes we're like, no, if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. No, they are going to do it. Of course, the world needs you, but sometimes we need to breathe when we see the news and when we see what's going on in context. And so we need to stop mental health is very important, I think. And also like focusing on what do you want? And it's been, to me as an activist, it's a hard question, but sometimes it's been like, I want this, but I'm tired. Does it mean is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? And then one day my mom said, it's a normal thing. Like, hey, it's okay to be tired. It's okay to cry. The world sucks, but it's, what you want to give to the world, the seeds you want to plant. And if you decide that's your path, be happy. If you want to go and sell, stuff at the beach and just be hippie and enjoy it, go do that. But whatever makes you happy and fills your heart, and if you have like at least for me, it's kind of um, a purpose thing that I decided it for myself. Then if it makes me happy, I'll continue to do it. And if it doesn't, then one day I'll say I'll stop.
I
But
appreciate your candor. It is so important. I'm so glad you emphasized mental health and rest and taking a break. And you're right. Thanks for the quote from your mom. It's absolutely right. It's life. And thanks for talking about the strategies and particularly right that sometimes we think it is all us and it's not. People will pick up the platform and go. And I like that what you said about planting the seeds, right? We're planting the seeds. And I know in higher education, sometimes we're planting the seeds and it'll be the next generations who will
yeah,
really think about that. Maryangel, all I can say is this has been delightful. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for having this conversation. To everyone out there, please know that this has been recorded. You will be able to see it again. And of course, we know many of our faculty, staff, and students will revisit these recordings. Thank you again. We hope that everyone continues to take very good care out there. We know there are lots of things impacting people's lives. And I talked about a little bit of that at the beginning, but of course, please take care, be well. And of course, this is, we're coming toward the end of the semester here at NYU. And so we hope that everyone, happy graduations and all of those things as well. Maryangel, thank you again. And we look forward to our continued partnership with you and the university. Again, everyone, thank you for
thank
being here.
you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.
All the best, everyone.